The year was 1887, and the Arizona Territory stretched endlessly under a merciless sun that seemed to drain life from everything it touched. In this unforgiving landscape, where survival was measured not in days but in heartbeats, a lone figure moved across the dusty plains like a ghost seeking redemption. She was Ayanna, a young Apache widow whose world had crumbled like autumn leaves in a prairie fire. Her husband, a respected warrior named Dakota, had fallen 3 moons ago during a skirmish with cavalry soldiers near the Gila River. The bullet that claimed his life had also shattered the fragile peace their small band had managed to maintain. Without his protection and leadership, the remaining members of their group had scattered like seeds in the wind, each seeking refuge wherever they could find it. But for Ayanna, carrying the burden of 2 young children, acceptance was as rare as water in the desert. Her son, Keme, barely 8 winters old, walked beside her with the stoic determination that seemed bred into Apache bones. His dark eyes, once bright with the curiosity of childhood, now held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much hunger, too much loss. His sister, little Ciala, only 5 years old, rode on her mother's back, her tiny arms wrapped around Ayanna's neck like fragile vines clinging to a dying tree. The child's ribs showed through her torn dress, and her breathing came in shallow whispers that broke her mother's heart with each exhale. Before I continue, I want to ask you to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Your support means everything to us, and knowing where our stories reach helps us understand the incredible community we're building together. For 3 weeks, they had wandered through territories that no longer welcomed them. The reservations were overcrowded, their resources stretched thinner than spider silk. Government agents turned them away with bureaucratic coldness, citing regulations and quotas as if human suffering could be measured in paperwork. Other Apache bands, struggling with their own survival, could not afford to take in 3 more mouths to feed. Each rejection was another nail in the coffin of hope that Ayanna carried in her chest. The children grew weaker with each passing day. Keme had stopped asking for food, understanding with the terrible wisdom of the young that there was none to give. Ciala had begun to sleep more and more, her small body conserving what little energy remained. Ayanna knew the signs. She had seen them before during the harsh winters when game was scarce and the white man's promises proved as empty as his treaties. It was on a Tuesday morning, when the sun hung low and painted the sky the color of dried blood, that Ayanna made the decision that would haunt and define the rest of her life. She had spotted smoke rising from a distant ranch, a thin gray line against the endless blue that spoke of warmth, food, and the possibility of mercy. With her children clinging to consciousness by threads as thin as spider silk, she knew this might be their last chance. The ranch belonged to a man named Samuel "Sam" Mackenzie, a weathered cowboy in his early 40s, who had carved out a modest living from the harsh Arizona landscape. Sam had come west after the Civil War, carrying wounds both visible and hidden, seeking something he couldn't quite name in the vast emptiness of the frontier. His ranch was small but well-maintained, with a sturdy wooden house, a barn that had weathered many storms, and corrals that spoke of a man who took pride in his work. Sam had been mending a fence when he first saw them approaching, 3 figures moving across his land like mirages in the heat. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but as they drew closer, the reality of their situation became painfully clear. The woman walked with the careful steps of someone conserving every ounce of strength, while the boy beside her moved with a dignity that seemed far too old for his years. The little girl on the woman's back hung limp as a rag doll, and Sam's experienced eye told him she might not have much time left. Ayanna stopped at the gate to his property, her dark eyes meeting his blue ones across the wooden rails that separated their worlds. In that moment, 2 cultures, 2 histories of pain and survival, stood face to face under the unforgiving Arizona sun. She could see the wariness in his expression, the natural caution of a man who had learned that the frontier rarely offered simple solutions to complex problems. But she also saw something else, something that gave her the courage to speak the words that would change all their lives forever. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around their feet and carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out, its voice echoing across the empty landscape like a prayer offered to an indifferent sky. Ayanna's throat was dry as parchment, but she forced herself to speak, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of absolute desperation. "Take my children," she said in broken English. the words falling from her lips like stones into a deep well. Her hands trembled as she gestured toward Cam and Ciala, her heart breaking with each syllable. They die if no help. Please, mister, take my children. Sam Mackenzie had seen many things in his 43 years on this earth. He had witnessed the carnage of Gettysburg, where boys barely old enough to shave had fallen like wheat before the scythe. He had watched friends die of fever on the long trail west, their dreams buried in unmarked graves along the way. He had seen Apache raids and cavalry charges, each side convinced of their righteousness while the land itself seemed to weep blood. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, a mother's ultimate sacrifice, offered with the quiet dignity of someone who had already lost everything except love. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, filled with the weight of unspoken histories and the terrible mathematics of survival. Sam's mind raced through the implications of what she was asking. Taking in Apache children would bring scrutiny from neighbors, questions from authorities, and complications he could barely imagine. His ranch was modest, his resources limited, and the social climate of the territory was hardly welcoming to such arrangements. But as he looked into Ayana's eyes, Sam saw something that cut through all the practical considerations like a knife through silk. He saw the same look he had carried in his own eyes when he had buried his wife and infant son 5 years earlier, the look of someone who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. He saw a mother's love so pure and desperate that it transcended every boundary that society had erected between their peoples. Kemp stood beside his mother with the quiet strength of a young warrior, his small hand resting protectively on her arm. Despite his youth, there was something in his bearing that spoke of nobility, of a heritage that stretched back through generations of proud people who had called this land home long before the first white man had set foot on its soil. Ciala stirred weakly on her mother's back, her small face pale as moonlight, her breathing so shallow that Sam had to strain to see the rise and fall of her tiny chest. The cowboy removed his hat, running weathered fingers through graying hair as he considered the magnitude of the moment. The sun beat down mercilessly, and he could see the exhaustion in every line of Ayana's body, the way she swayed slightly as if the effort of standing was almost too much to bear. Her clothes were torn and dusty, her moccasins worn thin from countless miles of walking, but her dignity remained intact like an unbreakable core of steel. Sam had always been a man of few words, someone who believed that actions spoke louder than any speech. The frontier had taught him that survival often depended on making quick decisions with incomplete information, and his instincts had served him well over the years. Now those same instincts were telling him something that his rational mind struggled to accept, that this moment was bigger than practical considerations, bigger than social conventions, bigger than the fear that had governed so many interactions between their peoples. He looked at the children again, really looked at them, and saw not the enemy that newspapers and politicians had painted, but simply two young souls caught in the crossfire of forces beyond their control. Kemi's eyes held a spark of intelligence and determination that reminded Sam of his younger self, while Ciala's fragile beauty spoke to something protective and paternal that he thought had died with his own family. The decision, when it came, felt as natural as breathing. Sam stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and placed his hands on the gate that separated them. His voice when he spoke was rough with emotion but steady with conviction. "You come too," he said simply, his blue eyes meeting her dark ones with an intensity that transcended language barriers. "All of you. You come too." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Ayana's eyes widened in disbelief, as if she couldn't quite process what she had heard. She had prepared herself for rejection, for the possibility that he might take her children out of pity, while sending her away to die alone in the desert. She had steeled herself for the ultimate sacrifice, the final act of a mother's love. But this offer of inclusion, of belonging, of hope for all of them, was beyond anything she had dared to dream. Tears began to flow down her weathered cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dust and grime of their long journey. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something other than despair. It was a fragile emotion, as delicate as a butterfly's wing, but it was real, and it was growing stronger with each passing second. Sam opened the gate, the hinges creaking like old bones, and gestured for them to enter. "Come on," he said gently, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to chase away some of the desert's harsh indifference. "Let's get you all fed and cleaned up. We'll figure out the rest as we go. As Ayanna stepped through that gate, carrying her daughter and leading her son into an uncertain but hopeful future, she felt as if she was crossing more than just a property line. She was crossing from one life into another, from despair into possibility, from the ending of one story into the beginning of something entirely new. The sun, which had seemed so merciless just moments before, now felt warm and welcoming on her face. Behind them, the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory stretched endlessly, holding the ghosts of their past and the echoes of all they had lost. But ahead lay the promise of something different, not just survival, but the chance to build something meaningful from the ashes of tragedy. In that moment, as three strangers became something more than the sum of their parts, the harsh landscape seemed to soften just a little, as if even the desert itself recognized that something sacred was taking place. The ranch house stood before them like a beacon of hope, its windows catching the afternoon light and throwing it back in golden reflections. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and the possibility of a hot meal. For the first time in weeks, Ayanna allowed herself to believe that her children might not only survive, but thrive. And in the depths of her grateful heart, she whispered a prayer of thanksgiving to the spirits of her ancestors, knowing that somehow, against all odds, they had found their way home. Sam Mackenzie's ranch house was modest but sturdy, built from local timber and adobe that had weathered many seasons of desert storms and scorching summers. As he led his unexpected guests toward the front porch, he found himself seeing his home through their eyes, the well-maintained corrals, the vegetable garden that his late wife had started and he had continued to tend, the windmill that drew precious water from deep beneath the earth. It wasn't much by the standards of the wealthy ranchers who owned vast spreads further east, but it was honest work made manifest in wood and stone. The interior of the house told the story of a man who had known love and loss in equal measure. Photographs of a beautiful woman with kind eyes sat on the mantelpiece, alongside a small wooden cross and a faded daguerreotype of a baby who would never grow to manhood. The furniture was simple but well crafted, much of it made by Sam's own hands during the long winter evenings when the wind howled across the plains and memories were his only company. Ayanna's eyes took in every detail as Sam guided them to the kitchen, her survival instincts cataloging potential threats and safe spaces even as her heart began to dare hope for kindness. The kitchen was the heart of the home, with a large wood-burning stove that radiated blessed warmth, shelves lined with preserves and dried goods, and a table large enough to seat a family. The sight of so much food, beans and flour, preserved fruits and vegetables, strips of jerky hanging from the rafters, was almost overwhelming to someone who had watched her children grow thinner with each passing day. Sam immediately set about preparing a meal, his movements efficient and practiced. He had learned to cook out of necessity after his wife's death, and while his skills were hardly refined, he could produce hearty, nourishing food that would stick to the ribs and restore strength to weary bodies. He started with a simple broth, knowing that their stomachs would need to adjust gradually to regular meals after such prolonged hunger. While the soup simmered, he turned his attention to his guests, with the practical eye of someone accustomed to caring for injured animals and exhausted travelers. Little Ciala was clearly in the most immediate danger, her small body showing all the signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration. Sam had seen similar conditions in cattle during harsh winters, and he knew that the next few hours would be critical in determining whether the child would recover or fade away entirely. He prepared a mixture of warm milk and honey, diluted with water to make it easier for her weakened system to process. Ayanna watched his every movement with the intense focus of a mother hawk, ready to protect her young at the first sign of threat. But gradually her posture began to relax as she recognized the genuine care in his actions. When he offered the cup to Ciala, speaking in gentle tones that transcended language barriers, Ayanna felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Kemi stood near the window, his young face serious as he observed this strange new environment. Sam noticed the boy's alertness, the way his eyes tracked every movement and cataloged every detail. It was the behavior of someone who had learned that survival depended on constant vigilance, and Sam recognized it because he had worn the same expression during his early days on the frontier. "You like horses, son?" Sam asked, gesturing toward the corrals visible through the window. Kame's English was limited, but his eyes lit up with unmistakable interest. Horses were a universal language among the peoples of the West, and Sam had always believed that you could judge a man's character by how he treated his animals. As the afternoon wore on, the simple act of sharing a meal began to work its ancient magic. Food had always been more than mere sustenance among both Apache and frontier peoples. It was a symbol of hospitality, of acceptance, of the bonds that could form between strangers when basic human needs were met with generosity. Ayanna ate slowly, savoring each spoonful not just for its nourishment but for what it represented, the first step back from the brink of despair. Sam found himself studying his guests as they ate, trying to understand the magnitude of what he had committed himself to. Taking in a starving Apache family was not just an act of charity. It was a statement that would reverberate throughout the territory. His neighbors would have opinions, the territorial authorities would ask questions, and the delicate balance he had maintained between solitude and community would be forever altered. But as he watched Ciala's color begin to return and saw the grateful tears in Ayanna's eyes, Sam knew he had made the right choice. There were moments in a man's life when the path forward became crystal clear, when all the noise and confusion fell away to reveal a simple truth. This was one of those moments, and Sam Mackenzie was not a man to turn away from truth, no matter how inconvenient it might prove to be. The evening brought new challenges and small victories. Sam had prepared a makeshift bed for the family in the spare room that had once been intended as a nursery for the child he and his wife had lost. The irony was not lost on him. A room that had been prepared for new life, then sealed away in grief, was now serving its intended purpose in ways he could never have imagined. Ayanna helped her children settle for the night, her voice soft as she sang an ancient Apache lullaby that spoke of protection and peace. The melody was haunting and beautiful, carrying with it the weight of generations and the hope of survival. Sam listened from the kitchen as he cleaned the dishes, the foreign words somehow familiar to his heart, if not his mind. Later, as the house settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Sam and Ayanna found themselves sitting on the front porch, the vast Arizona sky spread above them like a blanket studded with diamonds. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer charged with desperation and uncertainty, but filled instead with the tentative beginnings of understanding. "Why?" Ayanna asked finally, her English halting but clear. "Why you help us?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains that stood like silent sentinels against the star-filled sky. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of his own losses and the hard-won wisdom that came from surviving them. "Lost my own family," he said simply. "Wife and baby boy. Fever took them both in the same week 5 years back." He paused, his hands working unconsciously at the brim of his hat. "Been alone ever since, telling myself it was better that way. Safer. Less chance of getting hurt again." He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "But seeing you today, seeing what you were willing to do for your children, reminded me that some things are worth the risk. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are stacked against you." Ayanna nodded slowly, understanding passing between them that went deeper than words. They were both survivors, both people who had lost everything, and somehow found the strength to keep going. In the harsh arithmetic of the frontier, that created a bond stronger than blood, more enduring than the social conventions that sought to keep their worlds apart. "Tomorrow," Sam continued, "we'll need to figure out the practical things. Papers, if we can manage them. A story that'll satisfy the authorities. Won't be easy, but I've got some friends who might help. Judge Morrison in town, he's a fair man. Doc Peterson, too. He'll want to check the children over, make sure they're getting stronger." The mention of authorities brought a flicker of fear to Ayanna's eyes, but Sam was quick to reassure her. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we'll make this work. You're family now, all of you. And family protects family." As the night deepened around them, both understood that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The morning would bring new challenges, new questions, and new obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in months, Ayanna felt something she had almost forgotten existed: hope for the future, not just for her children's survival, but for the possibility of building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering but somehow blessing this small miracle of connection that had taken place beneath their light. In a land where mercy was rare and kindness often seen as weakness, two broken souls had found each other and chosen to build something stronger together than either could have managed alone. The first week at the Mackenzie Ranch passed like a fever dream of adjustment and small miracles. Ciala's recovery was nothing short of remarkable. The combination of regular meals, clean water, and the security of knowing she was safe worked better than any medicine Doc Peterson could have prescribed. Her laughter, when it finally returned, was like music that had been missing from the ranch for far too long. She followed Sam around like a devoted shadow, her small hand often tucked trustingly into his weathered palm as he went about his daily chores. Kemi proved to be a quick study with the horses, displaying an intuitive understanding of the animals that impressed even Sam's experienced eye. The boy had inherited his people's legendary skill with horses, but more than that, he possessed a gentleness and patience that spoke well of his character. Within days he was helping with the feeding and grooming, his serious young face lighting up with genuine joy whenever he was in the corrals. Ayanna threw herself into the domestic work of the ranch with the fierce determination of someone who understood that her family's continued welcome depended on proving their worth. She cleaned and cooked with skills honed by years of making do with little, transforming Sam's bachelor quarters into something that felt like a real home. Her knowledge of desert plants and traditional remedies proved invaluable when one of the horses developed a persistent cough that had resisted conventional treatment. But it was the evening conversations that truly began to bridge the gap between their worlds. As they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, Sam and Ayanna shared stories of their past lives, their losses, and their dreams for the future. Language barriers gradually gave way to understanding, and cultural differences became sources of mutual learning rather than division. Sam learned about Apache traditions, about the deep spiritual connection his new family felt to the land that had been their home for countless generations. He began to understand the profound loss that came not just from death and displacement, but from being severed from the sacred places that gave life meaning. Ayanna, in turn, learned about Sam's own journey west, about the war that had scarred him and the love that had healed him, only to be taken away by forces beyond his control. The first real test of their new arrangement came on a Thursday morning when Sheriff Tom Bradley rode up to the ranch with 2 territorial officials in tow. Sam had been expecting this visit. News traveled fast in the sparsely populated territory, and the sight of Apache children playing in his yard had undoubtedly reached official ears within days. Sheriff Bradley was a fair man, but he was also a practical one who understood the delicate balance of territorial politics. The officials with him were less sympathetic, bureaucrats from back east who saw the Apache people as a problem to be managed rather than human beings deserving of compassion. Their questions were pointed and their suspicions barely concealed. "Mackenzie," Sheriff Bradley said as he dismounted, his tone carefully neutral, "heard you've taken in some Apache folks. These gentlemen from the territorial office want to ask you a few questions." Sam stepped forward, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Behind him, Ayanna appeared in the doorway with the children, her face carefully composed despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. This was the moment they had all been dreading, the test that would determine whether their fragile new family could survive the scrutiny of official attention. "Gentlemen," Sam said with a nod, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man comfortable in his own skin. "What can I do for you?" The lead official, a thin man with pale eyes and a permanent scowl, consulted a sheaf of papers. "Mr. Mackenzie, we have reports that you're harboring Apache individuals without proper documentation. You understand that all Native Americans in this territory must be accounted for and properly registered. These aren't Apache individuals," Sam replied calmly. "This is my family. Ayanna is my wife, and those are our children." The lie came so smoothly, so naturally, that even Ayanna was momentarily startled, but she quickly understood the game being played and stepped forward to stand beside Sam, her hand finding his arm in a gesture that spoke of long familiarity and deep affection. "Your wife?" The official's voice dripped skepticism. "And when exactly did this marriage take place?" 3 months ago," Sam replied without hesitation. "Private ceremony. Judge Morrison can confirm it if you need official verification." Sheriff Bradley's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing. He had known Sam for years and understood that the cowboy was not a man given to lies or deception. If Sam Mackenzie said these people were his family, then Bradley was inclined to believe him, regardless of what the paperwork might say. The officials spent another hour asking questions, examining the children and making notes in their ledgers. Throughout it all, Sam maintained his calm demeanor, while Ayanna played her part with the dignity and grace of a natural actress. Kemi and Ciala, sensing the tension but trusting in their new protector, stayed close to Sam's side and answered the few questions directed at them, with the careful politeness of children who understood that their future hung in the balance. Finally, the officials seemed satisfied, or at least unable to find any obvious flaws in Sam's story. They departed with warnings about proper documentation and reminders about territorial regulations, but they left the family intact. As their dust cloud disappeared over the horizon, Sam felt a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying begin to ease from his shoulders. "That was well done," Sheriff Bradley said quietly, lingering behind after the officials had gone. "But you know this won't be the end of it. They'll be watching, and if they find out you've been stretching the truth—" "Tom," Sam interrupted gently, "sometimes the truth is bigger than what's written in the law books. These people are my family now in every way that matters. If that means bending a few rules, then so be it." The sheriff studied his friend's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Just be careful, Sam. There are folks in the territory who won't be as understanding as I am, and if word gets back to the wrong people—" "I understand the risks," Sam replied, "but some things are worth fighting for." After the sheriff departed, the family gathered in the kitchen for a late lunch, the tension of the morning gradually giving way to relief and a deeper sense of security. They had passed their first official test, but more importantly, they had done it together, as a unit, each playing their part in protecting the whole. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna spoke the words that had been building in her heart all day. "You called us family," she said softly, her English more confident now after days of practice. "To those men, you said we were family." Sam was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Wasn't a lie," he said finally. "Maybe not the whole truth as they understand it, but not a lie. Family isn't just about blood, Ayanna. It's about choice. It's about standing together when the world tries to tear you apart." She nodded, understanding passing between them that went deeper than words. In the space of a week, they had become something new. Not Apache, not white, but something uniquely their own. They were a family forged by necessity but strengthened by choice, bound together by shared loss and common hope. The children had already begun to call Sam Papa, the word coming naturally to their lips, as if it had always belonged there. And when Ciala crawled into his lap that evening, her small arms wrapping around his neck with complete trust, Sam felt something in his heart that he thought had died with his first family begin to stir back to life. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, the Mackenzie family, for that's what they had become, regardless of what any official document might say, settled into the comfortable rhythms of evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their resolve and their commitment to each other. But tonight, they were together, they were safe, and they were home. The transformation of the ranch over the following months was remarkable to behold. What had once been the solitary domain of a grieving widower became a place alive with the sounds of family life. Ciala's laughter echoed from the corrals where she played with a litter of barn kittens, while Keme's serious voice could be heard in the evenings as he practiced reading from the books Sam had ordered from back east. Ayanna's influence was visible everywhere. In the herb garden she had planted using traditional Apache knowledge combined with techniques she learned from Sam's agricultural books, in the intricate beadwork that now decorated the curtains and cushions, and in the way the house itself seemed to breathe with new life. She had a gift for making beauty from simple materials, transforming the stark functionality of bachelor quarters into a warm and welcoming home. The relationship between Sam and Ayanna evolved gradually, built on mutual respect and shared responsibility rather than passion or romance. They were partners in the truest sense, each bringing their own strengths to the challenges of frontier life. Sam's knowledge of ranching and his connections in the white community complemented Ayanna's understanding of the land and her skills in traditional crafts and medicine. Their marriage, which had begun as a legal fiction to protect the family, slowly became something real and meaningful. It wasn't the passionate love of youth, but rather the deep affection and trust that came from facing adversity together and choosing to build something lasting from the ashes of their separate tragedies. The children thrived in ways that amazed everyone who knew their story. Keme grew tall and strong, his natural intelligence blossoming under Sam's patient tutelage. He learned to read and write with remarkable speed, devouring every book he could get his hands on while never losing his connection to his Apache heritage. Ayanna made sure of that. teaching him the old stories and traditions even as he embraced the opportunities that his new life offered. Ciala became the heart of the household, her sunny disposition and infectious laughter bringing joy to even the darkest days. She had no memory of the hunger and desperation that had nearly claimed her life, knowing only the security and love that surrounded her now. She called Sam Papa with complete naturalness and followed Ayanna around the house, learning the skills that would make her a capable woman in either world she might choose to inhabit. The community's acceptance came slowly but surely. Doc Peterson, who had been among the first to examine the children, became a strong advocate for the family, praising Sam's courage and Ayanna's strength to anyone who would listen. Judge Morrison, who had quietly backdated the marriage certificate to support Sam's story, found himself genuinely impressed by the family's integration and success. Even some of the neighboring ranchers, initially suspicious of Sam's unusual household, gradually came to respect what he had accomplished. The Mackenzie Ranch prospered under the combined efforts of all 4 family members, and prosperity had a way of silencing critics in a territory where success was measured in practical terms rather than social conventions. But it was the small moments that truly defined their new life together. Sam teaching came to rope cattle while Ayanna watched with proud eyes, Ciala falling asleep in Sam's lap while he read to her from a book of fairy tales, the family working together to bring in the harvest from their expanded vegetable garden. The evening conversations on the porch where 4 people from vastly different backgrounds shared their dreams and fears under the vast Arizona sky. There were challenges, of course. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight, and there were always those who viewed the family with suspicion or outright hostility. Traveling to town required careful planning and constant vigilance, as the children's Apache features made them targets for the kind of casual cruelty that frontier society often directed toward those who were different. But Sam had learned to navigate these challenges with the same practical wisdom he applied to ranching. He chose his battles carefully, standing firm when principles were at stake but avoiding unnecessary confrontations that might endanger his family's security. Ayanna, for her part, developed a quiet dignity that commanded respect even from those who might have preferred to see her as less than human. The ranch itself became a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice. Visitors often remarked on the obvious happiness and prosperity of the Mackenzie family, and more than one neighboring rancher found himself reconsidering his own attitudes toward the Apache people. As the seasons turned and the family's roots grew deeper, Sam began to understand that he had gained far more than he had given. The loneliness that had consumed him after his first family's death had been replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging that he had never expected to feel again. Ayanna's quiet strength and wisdom had made him a better man, while the children had given him a reason to believe in the future once more. The ranch prospered as never before, but more importantly, it had become a home in the truest sense of the word. It was a place where love transcended the artificial boundaries that society tried to impose, where family was defined by choice and commitment rather than blood and tradition, where the harsh realities of frontier life were softened by the simple miracle of people caring for one another. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Sam and Ayanna would sit on their porch and watch the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. They would talk about their plans for expanding the ranch, about Kemi's education and Ciala's future, about the garden they wanted to plant and the improvements they hoped to make to the house. But sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but united by the knowledge that they had created something precious and rare, a family born not of biology but of choice, not of tradition but of love, not of convenience but of the courage to believe that broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful from the fragments of their shattered lives. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it a harsh cold that tested the resolve of even the most experienced frontier families. The Mackenzie Ranch, however, was better prepared than most. Ayanna's knowledge of traditional preservation methods had allowed them to store food more efficiently, while her understanding of desert plants had provided natural remedies for the minor ailments that cold weather often brought. The family drew closer together during the long winter evenings, gathering around the fireplace to share stories, play simple games, and plan for the spring planting. Sam had ordered a piano from back east, and Ayanna surprised everyone by revealing that she had learned to play during her brief time at a mission school as a child. The music that filled the house on those cold nights was a blend of classical melodies and Apache songs, creating something entirely new and beautiful. It was during one of these peaceful evenings that unexpected visitors arrived at their door. A small band of Apache, led by an elderly man named Nalnish, had been traveling through the territory when a winter storm forced them to seek shelter. They had heard stories of the Apache woman who lived with the white rancher, and curiosity had led them to the Mackenzie Ranch. The meeting was tense at first, with both sides uncertain of how to proceed. Nalnish and his companions were suspicious of Ayana's choices, viewing her integration into white society as a betrayal of her heritage. Ayana, for her part, felt the weight of their judgment and struggled to explain decisions that had been born of desperation rather than desire. But Sam's quiet dignity and the obvious happiness of the children gradually broke down the barriers of mistrust. When Nalnish saw how Keme had grown strong and confident, how Siala laughed with the carefree joy of a child who had never known want, and how Ayana herself had found peace and purpose, his stern expression began to soften. The Apache visitors stayed for 3 days, waiting for the storm to pass. During that time, they observed the family's daily routines, participated in their evening conversations, and gradually came to understand that what they were witnessing was not a betrayal of Apache values, but rather an expression of them in a new form. On their final evening together, Nalnish spoke words that would stay with the family forever. "The white man's world has taken much from our people," he said, his weathered face serious in the firelight. "But here, in this place, I see something different. I see Apache strength and wisdom living alongside white knowledge and resources. I see children who will know both worlds and be stronger for it." He turned to Ayana, his eyes reflecting a new understanding. "You did not abandon your people, daughter. You found a way to preserve what matters most. The children, the future, the hope that our ways will not die with us." When the Apache band departed, they left behind more than just tracks in the snow. They left a blessing, a recognition that the Mackenzie family represented something new and valuable, in a world that too often saw only conflict between cultures. For Ayana, their acceptance was a healing balm for wounds she hadn't even realized she still carried. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Word of the Mackenzie Ranch's success had spread throughout the territory, and Sam found himself approached by other ranchers seeking advice on everything from water management to crop rotation. Some were genuinely interested in learning from Ayana's traditional knowledge, while others were simply curious about the unusual family that had defied convention and prospered. The children continued to grow and thrive. Keme, now approaching his 10th birthday, had become an accomplished horseman and showed a natural aptitude for the business side of ranching. He could calculate feed costs and water requirements with the precision of a trained accountant, while never losing his appreciation for the spiritual connection between humans and the land that his Apache heritage had taught him. Siala, now 6, was a bright and curious child who seemed to absorb knowledge like a sponge. She spoke English and Apache with equal fluency, could read simple books, and had already begun to show an interest in the healing arts that her mother practiced. Her laughter remained the soundtrack of the ranch, a constant reminder of the joy that could emerge from even the darkest circumstances. As the family prepared for another planting season, they reflected on how far they had come from that desperate day when a starving Apache widow had approached a lonely cowboy's gate with nothing to offer but her children's lives. What had begun as an act of desperation had become a testament to the power of human compassion and the possibility of building bridges across the deepest cultural divides. The ranch itself had become more than just a successful agricultural enterprise. It had become a symbol of hope for a territory struggling to find its identity in the aftermath of conflict and displacement. Visitors came not just to conduct business, but to witness firsthand the proof that different peoples could not only coexist, but thrive together when they chose cooperation over conflict. Sam often found himself thinking about the moment when he had made the decision that changed all their lives. It had seemed so simple at the time, just a choice between turning away suffering and offering help. But he had come to understand that it was actually one of the most complex and important decisions he had ever made, one that had required him to look beyond the surface differences that society insisted were insurmountable, and see the common humanity that connected all people. The success of their unconventional family had not gone unnoticed by the territorial authorities, who were beginning to see the Mackenzie Ranch as a model for peaceful integration rather than a problem to be solved. Judge Morrison had quietly spread word of their story among his colleagues, and more than one official had begun to reconsider the harsh policies that had governed relations between white settlers and Native Americans. But for Sam, Ayanna, and the children, the most important measure of their success was not official recognition or community acceptance. It was the simple fact that they had created a home where love transcended the artificial boundaries that the world tried to impose. They had proven that family was not about blood or tradition, but about choice and commitment, about the willingness to stand together against whatever challenges life might bring. As another year turned toward summer, the Mackenzie family looked toward the future with confidence and hope. They had weathered the storms of prejudice and suspicion, overcome the challenges of cultural integration, and built something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of their separate tragedies. Their story had become a beacon of hope in a harsh land, proof that even in the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier, love could triumph over fear, understanding could overcome prejudice, and broken people could heal each other through the simple act of choosing to care. The summer of 1889 brought unprecedented prosperity to the Mackenzie Ranch. The combination of Sam's practical knowledge, Ayanna's traditional wisdom, and the children's eager assistance had created an operation that was both profitable and sustainable. Their cattle were healthy and numerous, their crops flourished despite the challenging desert conditions, and their reputation for quality and reliability had spread throughout the territory. But more importantly, the family had achieved something that transcended mere financial success. They had created a legacy of hope and possibility that would endure long after they were gone. Visitors to the ranch often remarked on the obvious happiness and contentment of all four family members, the way they worked together with seamless cooperation, and the sense of peace that seemed to permeate every aspect of their daily lives. Kemi had grown into a young man of remarkable character, equally comfortable discussing literature with visiting dignitaries and working alongside Apache visitors who occasionally stopped at the ranch. His education had been unconventional but thorough, combining formal schooling with practical experience and traditional knowledge. He spoke of his future with the confidence of someone who knew he belonged in both worlds and could succeed in either. Ciala had blossomed into a bright and beautiful child, whose very existence seemed to embody the possibility of harmony between cultures. She moved effortlessly between English and Apache, between traditional games and modern pursuits, between the spiritual world of her mother's people and the practical realities of frontier life. Her laughter remained the music of the ranch, a constant reminder of the joy that could emerge from even the darkest beginnings. Ayanna had found her place not just as a wife and mother, but as a bridge between worlds. Her knowledge of traditional medicine had made her a valued resource throughout the territory, and her quiet dignity had earned the respect of even those who had initially viewed her with suspicion. She had become living proof that strength and wisdom could flourish in any environment when nurtured by love and acceptance. Sam had discovered that his greatest achievement was not the success of his ranch, but the creation of a family that defied every convention and expectation of their time. He had learned that true courage was not about facing down outlaws or surviving harsh winters, but about opening your heart to people who were different from yourself and choosing love over fear when the world demanded otherwise. As the family gathered on their porch one evening to watch the sunset paint the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. It had begun with desperation and an impossible choice, but it had become something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of human compassion and the possibility of building something meaningful from the fragments of broken lives. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, but it was more than just land and buildings and livestock. It was home in the truest sense of the word, a place where love had triumphed over prejudice, where understanding had overcome fear, where four people from vastly different backgrounds had chosen to become family and had discovered that family was the strongest force in the world. In the distance, a coyote called out to the emerging stars, its voice carrying across the vast expanse of the Arizona territory like a song of survival and hope. The Mackenzie family listened to that ancient sound, each lost in their own thoughts but united by the knowledge that they had created something precious and rare, a love that transcended every boundary, a family that defied every convention, and a home that would endure long after the harsh realities of frontier life had faded into memory. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Sam reached for Ayanna's hand while the children leaned against their shoulders, and together they watched the night settle over their land. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight they were together. They were home, and they were proof that even in the harshest circumstances, love could find a way to flourish. The story of the starving Apache widow who had pleaded, "Take my children," and the cowboy who had replied, "You come too," had become legend throughout the territory. But for the Mackenzie family, it was simply the beginning of a life built on the radical idea that family was not about blood or tradition, but about choice and love, and the courage to believe that broken people could heal each other and create something beautiful together. Their legacy would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of compassion and the possibility of building bridges across even the deepest cultural divides. In a land where mercy was rare and kindness often seen as weakness, they had proven that love was the strongest force of all, capable of transforming not just individual lives but entire communities and, ultimately, the world itself.